And so they
Right.
become like best friends, peas and carrots.
I'm Forrest, Forrest Gump.
From that day on, we was always together. Jenny and me was like peas and carrots.
Yep, I love that quote.
My mom always said life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get.
All right. Well, thank you, Laurel, for joining. So today we're going to talk about the movie Forrest Gump.
Yay.
Yeah, we've been talking about that for a while. I think in the summertime we decided, and here we're in October.
Takes a while for us to get to anything these days.
It is worth waiting for, and a movie that I first saw in 1994 when it came out. I was going to be between my freshman and sophomore year. I went to go see it with my father in Colorado. I remember where I was when I saw that.
Tom Hanks is an amazing actor, and he always plays an amazing part, whether he's a captain of a ship or a stowaway or on a desert island or playing a kid in a movie. Whatever he does, he's so good at all of these things. And so this is one of his early performances, right?
It was fairly early, yes.
He's relatively young. Well, in this story, he's a kid, and then they
Yes.
have another kid playing him,
Mhm.
and then he is an adult in a lot of it, and goes through all these interesting things in his life, and we get to see it all.
So was he like a fictional character in Forrest Gump?
Well, it says here that he serves in the Vietnam War. He meets President John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson and Richard Nixon. So he meets three presidents in this movie, and he shakes their hands, and he's on video and everything. And of course, he's superimposed, but at the time, it looks really real. He represents the US in a ping pong match against China. He inspires one of John Lennon's most famous songs. Among other things, he's on TV and he gives John Lennon some ideas for lyrics. And is it Yesterday, the song? Or no, Imagine.
Imagine.
Yeah,
Hard to imagine.
that's the
That
hard to
was that's
imagine.
the quote I was thinking of, the quote where
Oh,
they had no
yes,
religion. Imagine that.
right. And no religion too,
Because basically
and
they're interviewing
And in China, they never go to church.
No religion, too?
Ah, hard to imagine.
Well, it's easy if you try, Dick.
yeah, so it's just interesting how he like inserts himself into all these famous things, and he almost is like he's changing history. Like John Lennon really didn't learn the lyrics from Forrest Gump, but it seems like in this movie he did.
Yep.
So it says here in this Screen Rant article, the historical accuracy of Forrest's role in these events is obviously fictional, but the movie presents him as a key figure in many significant moments, like meeting those presidents and everything else. And he even uncovers Richard Nixon's fraudulent activities, and supposedly he's the one who gets him taken away from the presidency.
Yeah, because the president he was staying at a not so good hotel, and the president said, "I'll have you stay at the new hotel. I'll have my people take care of it." So he gets him a room at the Watergate Hotel.
And then he sees a light.
The lights are off and they must be looking for a fuse box or something because them flashlights, they're keeping me awake.
And it was actually somebody snooping around looking for government documents.
Exactly. So
So
yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Like we meet him and we learn that he's, I guess, a definition of how to describe him, that he's like a little bit slow-witted. He has a IQ of 75. You need 80 to go to public school. So he's not the brightest bulb, but he's just this, and he goes through life and all these things are happening around him, all this racism. He's witnessing integration of the University of Alabama, and Wallace
yep.
standing at the door. He's there. They actually superimpose him, and he's basically doesn't understand what's the problem. In fact, he picks up the notebook for the young lady that is going to start there, the first African American woman that's going to go there, and picks it up and hands it to her because he just
Right.
doesn't see any reason. He doesn't even understand. I don't think he understands that there's racism. He thinks everyone's the same.
Yeah, his mom actually taught him this, and she says everybody is valuable and everybody is, there's no racism in her mind. And but yeah, there back then it was very segregated, and until they started integrating the races in these schools, it was the 60s, right?
Hmm.
colored people had to do certain things and white people had the privilege of other things. And there was a lot of, feeling behind that back then. And I'm so glad that I was a kid in the 60s or a baby in the 60s. So I didn't really go through a lot of that. The 70s was the flower children and Jenny and, wearing, bell bottoms and free love and all that stuff with the hair and, the VW buses. All that is such an icon of American culture back then that it's almost like you can define each decade. The 60s was, segregation and coming out of it. The 70s was like flower children and free love. And then the 80s was really when I grew up, and it was all like, we remember the 80s. The 80s, in my opinion, were kind of the best decade. And
Yeah,
that's
mine
why we
too.
like all these 80s movies, is because they were interesting. We had so many things back then. But seriously, like Forrest Gump is a compilation of a lot of people. They say here on the article, Forrest Gump is actually the embodiment of the average American. And his part in so many key historical events is a statement on how like the average person is part of history. And he could be there. I mean, standing in front of the White House, speaking to everybody, and then his microphone doesn't work.
Oh, right, right.
It's
That was Lincoln Memorial actually, and
yeah.
they
Oh, there it was.
basically, he's in his uniform because he was just at the White House, and some Vietnam protesters grab him and put him on stage and ask him to talk about Vietnam, and somebody pulls out the all the wires for the mics so no one can hear him. But let's also like circle back to Jenny. He meets her when it's his first day of school, and he gets on the bus, and no one will offer him a seat except for Jenny.
You can sit here if you want.
I had never seen anything so beautiful in my life.
And so they become
Right.
like best friends, peas and carrots.
I'm Forrest Gump.
From that day on, we was always together. Jenny and me was like peas and carrots.
Yep, I love that quote. Yeah, so she is like the nicest girl that he meets, because everybody's like, nope, you can't sit here. Because why? Because he had braces on his legs.
Yes.
So he was physically impaired as well as mentally impaired, with his IQ, because he's going into public school because his mom demands that he get to be with the other kids.
Mhm.
And she doesn't want him labeled as special or anything like that. So that's why he grows up with all the rest of the kids, but he does have a little bit of an issue with being popular and so on, which in my opinion, makes you more compassionate.
Mm-hmm.
And so he always accepted everybody because he was glad to be accepted himself.
And he developed this friendship with Jenny. He didn't really realize, like, some things he said, oh, her father was very loving with her and her sisters, but he doesn't realize that the reason why she never wants to be at home and why she's scared of being in her father's house is that he's actually sexually abusing her. And I think that is another aspect of this movie, that Jenny ends up having a lot of problems in life and probably some bad relationships because of the sexual abuse that she had as a child. She just picked like wrong choices throughout life. He always
Yeah.
said, I love you, will you marry me? But she was like, no, you don't want me, like basically because she wasn't able to have a healthy relationship. So I think that's another aspect of the movie, is you have this very innocent Forrest Gump who's in the right place and in all these different situations, and goes to college, graduate college, goes to Vietnam and all these things. And then you have Jenny who gets thrown out of college because she takes a risque picture in Playboy magazine with the college sweater, and she gets kicked out. And then she ends up just going through a whole bunch of like drifting across the United States.
Right. Taking a ride from anybody that she can. Of course, she's a pretty blonde, so somebody will pick her up, but you better be careful because you don't know who's picking you up and you never know what's going to happen to you. And so she is definitely a free spirit.
And another thing that I had not realized until a conversation that we had recently together is that Robin Wright, the actress that plays Jenny, she was in our last movie, The Princess Bride. It was you that actually
Yes.
pointed that out to me.
Yes, I said, did you realize it's the same actress? And, she is the same actress as the other movie.
And when you said that to me, I had to watch it again. I'm like, I have to watch it again with now thinking about, okay, that's the same actress as The Princess Bride. Because I totally missed that, even though I just watched The Princess Bride and we reviewed that.
Well, now you know.
Now I know. So a connection, like every single time it seems like there's a connection. We're like, okay, Meg Ryan, and then we're
Right.
like, okay, now we're gonna do Princess Bride that has the same director as When Harry Met Sally, and now we do
Yeah.
Forrest Gump that has the same actor. So it's like, oh, there's like these connections that keep on coming up in these movies. But let's circle back and talk about his time in Vietnam or time in the
Okay.
army, because he met his best friend Bubba there,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, he
another
did.
friend. So first he
Yeah.
met Bubba.
And Bubba, of course, accepted him because, Bubba had some problem with his teeth. Is like this all the time when he talked. I don't know how he did that the whole time. It's crazy. But he was just accepting of Bubba, and Bubba was accepting of him. And so they just did everything together and understood each other. And of course, he listened to him.
And that was another time too when he first got on the bus. No one would let him have a seat.
At first, it seemed like I made a mistake, seeing how it was only my induction day and I was already getting yelled at.
Sit down if you want to.
But Bubba did. He said,
Right.
you can sit here if you want. And then he immediately started telling him about the shrimping business.
Right. The shrimping business. You can barbecue it. You can boil it. You can broil it, bake it, saute it. There's shrimp kebabs, shrimp creole, shrimp gumbo, pan fried, deep fried, stir fried. There's pineapple shrimp, lemon shrimp, coconut shrimp, pepper shrimp, shrimp soup, shrimp stew, shrimp salad, shrimp and potato, shrimp burger, shrimp sandwich. That's about it.
Yeah, you
Bubba
see them in
says.
all these different scenes as he's telling, like they're
I know.
they're putting the guns together, taking it apart, they're scrubbing the floor, and then scrubbing the floor. I think, well, that's about it. And it was
It's like 5 hours later.
yeah, exactly. And it was probably like sometime in Vietnam when they're like out in the rain. It's nighttime. They have their backs against each other to give themselves some support. And he's like, "Hey, I got a question for you. Will you go in the shrimping business with me?"
And he wants to. He says he will, but then something happens to Bubba.
Oh, yeah, something happens, but let's also like circle back and talk about Lieutenant Dan too. So they get
Yes,
there,
yes.
they get to Vietnam, and they meet Lieutenant Dan.
Where you boys from in the world?
Alabama, sir.
You twins?
No, we are not relations, sir.
Who they salute, and he's like, "Don't salute. There's snipers all over the place that would like to grease an officer." So
Right.
they
means kill him. Spot
Yeah.
him and kill him.
Yeah.
Right.
so they're following Lieutenant Dan, and Lieutenant Dan seems to really care about his, I don't know what you call it, the people serving under him, and they're
yeah.
out on all
His
kinds of
recruits.
walks, right?
Right.
And Lieutenant Dan thinks he sees something, whatever. They all get down.
Get down! Shut up!
Right?
Right.
Get down. And
Yeah.
eventually, like nothing happens, but eventually there is an ambush. And
Yes.
this is where first Forrest listens to what Jenny told him to do. Run, don't be brave, run. He ran away. Then he thought, I left behind my best friend.
Right. I have to go back and get Bubba. And then he sees somebody else on the ground and he takes him back. And then he goes back to find Bubba. And then he sees somebody else on the ground. And he takes him back. I gotta go get Bubba. And he keeps going. He even gets Lieutenant Dan, who's gotten his
He didn't
legs
want to
blown
be
off.
saved. He didn't want to be saved.
Right. He's like,
Because
no,
all
I
of
gotta
his
take
ancestors
you.
had died in war, and he wanted to have that. He wanted to die in war. He did not want. He ended up being saved, but he lost his legs, and
Right.
then he
And
found.
then later on, Lieutenant Dan is so mad at him.
We all have a destiny. Nothing just happens. It's all part of a plan. I should have died out there with my men, but now I'm nothing but a goddamn cripple.
And he was very bitter about this for years.
Yeah. But he wasn't able to save Bubba. They had their, he picked him up and pulled him out of that ambush, but he wasn't able to save Bubba. But he wanted to keep that promise to start that shrimping business.
Right. So he went back to Bubba's hometown and talked to his mom, who had a bunch of kids.
Are you crazy? Or just plain stupid?
Stupid is, stupid does, Mrs. Blue.
And then he started it from there, right?
Yeah, he ended up actually getting the money because he became a ping pong champion, right?
That's right. That's
China,
right.
he went all over the place playing ping pong, and his mother told him to tell a little white lie that this particular paddle was so great and served him so well in his championships in China and stuff. Little white lie. He got $25,000.
When I was in China on the All-America ping pong team, I just loved playing ping pong with my Flexo Lights ping pong paddle, which everybody knows isn't true, but Mama said it's just a little white lie, so it wasn't hurting nobody.
He used that to buy that shrimping boat and get started.
Yes, yes. And at first, it didn't go well. He couldn't get any shrimp.
He just got
And then
junk
what
and
happened?
trash on the bottom of the ocean. And we did miss a part where he does go and spend Christmas with Lieutenant Dan, who's then cripple, and he tells him about his idea to be a shrimping boat captain.
I'll tell you what, Gilligan, the day that you are a shrimp boat captain, I will come and be your first mate.
He doesn't think he's ever going to do it. And he does.
And then Lieutenant Dan arrives there on the dock.
Thought I'd try out my sea legs.
Well, you ain't got no legs, Lieutenant Dan.
Yes, I know that.
He's there on the dock.
And he says, okay, you told me, you know, you were going to be one. And I didn't believe you, but here I am. I'm going to help you out.
I told you if you were ever a shrimp boat captain that I'd be your first mate. Well, here I am. I am a man of my word.
So they're off, and they're still not catching anything. At one point, they actually like have a toilet seat and all kinds of trash coming in the nets. And then Lieutenant Dan talks about like God, like why don't you pray to God, right? So Forrest Gump goes and he's praying to God and all that, and then all of a sudden there's a big storm that comes.
And Lieutenant Dan gets up to the top of the sail. So he's in the wind, in the strongest part of the wind. And he says, okay, God, do it to me. If you're going to kill me now. You know, I wanted to die in that, you know, jungle, and now I'm here. So my life is good for nothing. Just go ahead and, you know, take me away. And he won't do it.
It's time for a showdown! You and me! I'm right here! Come and get me!
God is just like, nope, you're going to live, you know? So he has to get down, and he's okay. I fought with God. I'm still here. And he makes the best of his life after that. But
And
you know,
what happens too is that all the other shrimping boats get destroyed, and they're the only one left.
That is amazing. Maybe that was God.
that was God. It's like, I think he found God that day, and basically came to terms with it, and they became to have the only shrimping boat left, so they ended up having really good luck in the shrimping business.
Louise, that's Forrest.
After that, shrimping was easy.
Yeah, because if you're the only one, you do great. And then later on, there's a quote here that says, Lieutenant Dan got me invested in some kind of fruit company, Apple Computer. So then I got a call from him saying, we don't have to worry about money no more. And I said, that's good. One less thing.
And so, like, one thing we didn't mention, that all this time he's sitting on a bench and he's telling his life story to various people in Savannah, Georgia. He's sitting on this bench. Buses are stopping and going. And so at this point, there's a man that says, so you're telling me that you're the owner of Bubba Gump Shrimp? And he's like, yep. And he's like, so we're just sitting next to a millionaire. And the guy, he's like, yep. And he's like, so then this guy just walks away. He's like, imagine that. We're sitting next to a millionaire. And this other old woman, she said, it's a very lovely story. You tell it so well.
Would you like to see what Lieutenant Dan looks like?
Well, yes, I would.
That's him right there.
So at that point in the story is, I believe, is when Jenny comes back into his life and stays with him. And they just have a really wonderful time. He stays in that beautiful house that his mother had in
when she died, she gave it to him.
Yeah, and so she stays there for a while, and they walk, and they just spend, they're sitting in their tree, and they just spend time together.
We was like peas and carrots again.
And then he asks her to marry him, like 4th of July, because they're watching the fireworks, and she's like, you don't want to marry me. But that night, she goes to his room, and they get together.
They do it.
Right?
One time.
And then the next morning, she leaves again. She's off and on her way off. But before she left, she bought him.
And she gave me the best gift anyone could ever get in the wide world.
Just for running.
A pair of Nike running shoes.
When he's bored, he hasn't, you know, she's gone and he doesn't have anything to do because he doesn't have to work. And, I don't think he ever has a real job in his whole life. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, he didn't really have a real job because when he did get offered a job to mow grass, he just did it for free because he didn't need the money.
Right,
So
right.
yeah.
So,
And I do want to mention we forgot one other thing. He did end up giving half of his money, even though Lieutenant Dan said he was crazy. But a promise is a promise. He gave half of his money to Bubba's family, and
That's
she never
right.
had to work in no one's kitchen ever again.
She was like a highfalutin black lady at that point.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah. So he
So,
starts running at that point, right?
yeah,
He's got
yeah,
those
he
sneakers and he
does.
just starts running.
And here's the quote that says that. That day, for no particular reason, I decided to go for a little run. So I ran to the end of the road. And then when I got there, I thought maybe I'd run to the end of town. And when I got there, I thought maybe I'd just run across Greenbow County. And I figured since I run this far, maybe I just run across the great state of Alabama. And that's what I did. I ran clear across Alabama. For no particular reason, I just kept going. I ran clear to the ocean. And when I got there, I figured since I gone this far, I might as well turn around, just keep on going. When I got to another ocean, I figured since I gone this far, I might as well just turn back, keep right on going. Like things are no big deal for him.
Yeah.
It's just crazy how nonchalant he is. And that's a good word for not
That we're
caring
not-
about what people think, not caring about how, if you're tired or hungry, he's not. He grows a beard, he has the same clothes on. I don't know how he has like money because I don't think he bring anything with him. And where does
But he
he
said
sleep
when
at
he was
night? We
tired,
don't
he
know.
slept. When he was hungry, he ate. So he must have had a credit card with him or something because he.
Must have. We don't care about that part. It's part of the story.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And then he starts gathering people that come after him thinking he's running for some cause.
More people joined in.
And so they're like, running after him, and he gets a bigger and bigger crowd, and they think it's some big thing, and he's on the news, and he's like famous. Look at this guy running across the United States. And then at the very end, when he's just been running for 3 years, 2 months, 14 days, and 16 hours, and he's got beard, and he's got like clothes on, and he's just like looks haggard, like he's been out for 3 years doing this same thing. And then he turns around, he stops, and he just turns around, and this young man in the crowd says, quiet, quiet, he's going to say something. And then Forrest says something very profound. I'm pretty tired, I think I'll go home now. And he does. And then people are like, what do we do now?
Yeah, they're just out. They're out in Monument Valley, like they're out in the middle of nowhere. I always wonder, like, where are these other people eating and sleeping? He has money, like he's all set, but what are these other people all following him? What are they doing?
Right. And what do they do next? I mean, you can't just follow somebody just because they're doing something you think is good and they haven't said anything to you. Like you're just following somebody for no reason.
Yeah.
So, but he goes home, and what does he do next?
I think that's when he must get a letter, which is where we end up finding him on that bench. And he tells the old lady that's sitting next to him that he has this letter that from Jenny, and that she's asked him to come visit him, and he's going to take the number 9 bus. And he says what address it is, and she's like, you don't need to take no bus. It's just a couple blocks down that way. And he's like, down that way? Yeah, down that way. And he gets up and he's running. She's like, good luck to you.
And he's like, nothing. A couple blocks is nothing, right?
Yep.
So he goes to her house, and what happens?
I mean, she opens the door, and she's like, oh, Forrest. And he's like, I got your letter. She's like, I was wondering about that. And she starts to show him this scrapbook that she's been making about all the clippings about his running, and showing this to him.
Everything, there you are. This, I got you running.
I ran a long way.
And then a knock comes to the door, and the babysitter comes with her son.
And it's actually his son too.
Yeah, because he said his name is Forrest, and he's like, his name is Forrest too, and she's like, I named him after his daddy, and he says,
father,
his daddy's named Forrest too, and she's like, you're his daddy. And then he like steps back, and he's like, she thinks like, oh, he's like really like upset, like I'm trying to trap him, but actually he's just really worried that maybe the boy is not smart.
And so he says with tears in his eyes, he's like, is he smart? Not like me, right?
And
then she's like, yes, he's smart.
He's the smartest in his class.
And he's such a cute little boy. And he's got this little bowl haircut, and he sits in front of the TV all,
and then Forrest sits next to him, and they both kind of sit together like this.
It's so cute. So he's his daddy from then on.
Yeah, and so they go to a park and Forrest is playing and Jenny tells him that she's sick with some sort of virus. The doctors don't know what it is. And he's like, if you're sick, I'll take care of you. You and Forrest can come live with me. And they do. And she says, will you marry me?
Yeah, so she says to him, will you marry me? And then they do. And it's this cute little wedding in the backyard or the front yard of that beautiful house. And guess who comes to the wedding?
Lieutenant Dan.
With his new wife, who is Vietnamese or something.
His new wife or fiance and his titanium alloyed new legs that he had.
New legs?
Yeah, I got new legs. Custom made. Titanium alloy.
It's just a great wedding. It's a great time. And he just takes care of her, and he's such a good dad to his son. And then what happens at the end?
That's when I start to cry because he's at her grave and he says, you died on a Tuesday. And
Aww.
he talks to her, and I'm crying. He says, they buried you under the tree. I had your father's house knocked over. And he has a letter.
Here, wrote you a letter. And he says, I can't read it. Not supposed to, so I just leave it here for you.
Try not to cry now. He's got a letter from Forrest. Little Forrest said he couldn't read, but just leave it there under the tree. And I just think, why, Jenny? Why could you have not spent the 5 years? Because I couldn't actually figure out the whole thing, but I was reading something, and it's about 5 years have passed. He's been running for 3 years, but 5 years have passed when they finally meet up again, and they could have spent that time together, and they didn't.
Right.
And it's just sad that she died, but it's also sad that they lost that time, too.
Yeah, she didn't see a good thing. And she finally said, a lot of people do this later in life. They say, man, I missed out on so much. Now I want to be your dad, or now I want to be, this part of your life. And they're like, no, we missed too much time together. But at least they had that time.
They had that time. I think they had some time before she died. And it's not clear in the movie, but I think it was a few months or a year after they got married that they had together, but they could have had all that time. Because Forrest is then going to school, and he's either going to kindergarten or first grade at that point. He's getting on the bus, and he is the same bus driver. Now, we didn't talk about the beginning, but the beginning, Forrest is about to get on the bus, and he's like, the woman's like, this is the bus to school, and I can't get on if I don't, my mother told me not to talk to strangers.
I can't talk to strangers, right.
Yeah, so she's like, this is the bus to school, and he's like, well, my name's Forrest Gump, and she's like, my name is...
Her name is Dolores something.
Yeah, Dolores. And so, yeah, Dolores, or, anyway, she says her name. And at that point, she's smoking a cigarette. And when little Forrest gets on the bus.
You understand this is the bus to the school now, don't you?
Of course. And you were Dorothy, yours, and I'm Forrest Gump.
Yeah, so then she's not smoking a cigarette. She's chewing gum. But it's like, how is the same
she's
bus
like,
driver?
What, 20, 30 years later, and she's still driving the same bus.
And I realized when I was watching this that when they have that scene that I always cry at, that Jenny and Forrest are a little bit older than my parents. Her birthday was 1945, so I'm guessing his is the same. And my parents were both born in 1949. So I was talking to my father, and as I said, I went to see this with him when I was 19. And this is basically lots of things that happened. Everything, my father remembers those things, and my father was in Vietnam. And my father said, did you know that I cried during that? And I was like, I didn't know. I mean, we're in the movie theater, I did not know that he was crying.
Right.
I said, what part? He's like, yeah, when Jenny died. And I always cry at that part. So, but that really, I think that resonates. They say that he's the average, Forrest Gump is the average American. And especially the average American at that time, baby boomer, born after the war, and experienced all those things that most Americans then experienced and saw on television, and then they superimpose him into these scenes with Kennedy and with Johnson and with Nixon and with Governor Wallace, and all those scenes he's superimposed and he's there.
Right. And we learn history from this movie.
Yes.
And that's what I think is cool about it. It's not just about Forrest and Jenny. It's about history.
It's about history. It's about American culture. It's about American classes and race issues and struggles. It does have the element of of Jenny having that sexual abuse and how that affected her life and how she got into drugs and all that kind of stuff. So it has so much together. And that's why we kind of talked about, like, let's have this as our next movie, because what is American culture? Like, maybe Forrest Gump is American culture.
Yeah, it totally is. And we get to see it through a child's eyes, through an adult's eyes that's just kind of there, giving us all this history in a very non-historical way, but in a way that a kid could understand, like anybody could understand this. And so I love that about it. And I think it was a great movie to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. Did we have another movie? Did we pick a movie? We were talking about a movie.
We were, but what were we talking about? I mean,
We
we
had
have
all
to
kinds
think
of movies
about,
that I was
we did. We were talking about
Finding Forrest, or Lean on Me, Back to the Future.
Back to the Future would be a great one.
Do you want to do Back to the Future?
We could. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we could do that. I think that's a great one to do.
Okay, then that's it. Because that one, again, that might be like, another kind of like American culture. Like you have what was he? Who's living in the 80s, and then he goes back to the 60s, and there's the whole, or the 50s actually, because I think they had like the poodle skirts
when his
going on.
parents were young. That's
when
crazy.
his parents were young.
All right. Well, thank you, Rochelle. This was a lot of fun.
All right, thank you.
All right. See you next time.
See you next time.